Hey everybody. Today we are going to talk about exercise and physical activity guidelines. So I mentioned this in the past videos that we'd be talking about this today, and we'll get right into it. So what these guidelines are recommendations based off of research, quite a bit of research um, out there on exercise and physical activity that the ACSM, which is the American College of Sports Medicine, which is what the Slippery Rock Exercise Science Program is accredited through, um, they interpreted those results and they gathered physical activity and exercise recommendations for like weekly blocks of time to make sure that if people want to be active enough to decrease risk of cardiovascular diseases and all-cause mortality and things like frailty and stuff like that. Um, uh, they now have these pieces of information available, and they can be used pretty effectively to make sure that you're staying active and not uh, not regressing. So what these guidelines are not uh, a means of exercise prescription. They're not a means of weight loss or strength training per se. However, depending where an individual starts at, um, they they may notice these benefits from doing the guidelines and meeting the guidelines of physical activity and exercise. So, for example, for me, with where I'm at with my health and fitness and my exercise history, these guidelines are really more of a physical activity base than what I would consider for myself to be moderate to vigorous intensity exercise. For example, for me, if I wanted to meet the aerobic exercise guideline of this, that would be uh, that would be 30 minutes a day of five, um, 30 minutes a day for 5 days a week of maybe jogging or doing sprint intervals um, or biking at a high intensity, lots of RPMs on a stationary bike, or even hiking up a really steep hill. Here at Slippery Rock, we have the ski lodge, and I've done a few workouts at the ski lodge's like short but very steep hill there. Um, so for me, that's what that would be. However, for somebody who might be older than I am, or they haven't had a very active lifestyle in the past years or months, to due to whatever reason, like say maybe you were hospitalized for a long period of time, um, doing 30 minutes of something like walking or cleaning around your house might be really, really challenging for a person like that. And so that's kind of how you have to look at these to interpret them for where they match up with you. As far as strength training goes, um, I come from a background of powerlifting, CrossFit, a bit of calisthenics in there, and um, and I was an athlete for just about my whole life, starting from eighth grade until just a couple years ago. But even now, I'm still a power lifter and stuff like that, even though the gyms are closed. So for me, my point being, for me, these guidelines aren't the guidelines of strength, which is to do 8 to 10 exercises, one set of 8 to 12 reps for each exercise. Um, that for myself isn't really what I would consider strength training or resistance training exercise for myself. Just because I think where I'm at, that would be a bit less than what I might need. That might be a good warm up for me or something like that. But it wouldn't necessarily be what I would consider resistance training for myself. For myself, I would, oh, and that's recommended to do twice a week, and the intensity it's recommended to do is a weight for each exercise that makes you feel like you could do maybe 1 to 2 more reps. Um, if you look it up, it will say volitional failure. What volitional failure just means is that, like, if you're doing bicep curls, you're doing bicep curls until you get here and you can't quite lift the weight anymore and the burn is just going crazy and stuff and you can't complete the rep. That would be what volitional failure would be. I don't typically recommend people do that um, if they're just trying to meet these guidelines or something like that, just because I don't think that that's totally necessary, but that's that's what it'll say if you look it up. Um, Now, for somebody else, though, simply doing 8 to 10 exercises might sound like a lot, and it might end up being a lot. Even just doing one set of those exercises, that really might end up being a lot for somebody. For example, um, for me, uh, there was a time in high school when I broke my back, and I had a whole list of issues going on with my back, and I basically was laid up. I could only do like very light as tolerated swimming, um, progressive ish yoga, and just dead hanging from a pull-up bar. So I would hang from a pull-up bar and just relax my entire body to kind of decompress my spine. That was all I could do for a year and a half to 2 years. And so the first time that I came back into the gym, I did 3 or 4 exercises, maybe like a couple sets of each of them, and I was smoked. I was spent, and it just it just was where I was starting at. And so that's what I'm kind of saying with this. You have to compare yourself um, to what's realistic for you and what the guidelines are saying. So if you have any questions about that, you can absolutely reach out and I'll try and help you with it. Um, or another member of the Buell Club could help you with it and we could better direct you there. So by all means, reach out and ask questions if you have them. So let's get into what the guidelines actually are. So for exercise and physical activity regarding aerobic exercise, which is things that elevate your heart rate for sustained periods of time that are like repetitive motions. So for example, if I were to do a quick little warm up and then do a set of 5 deadlifts as heavy as I could possibly go for 5 repetitions, that's not going to be aerobic because it's not a very long duration. My heart rate might go up, but it's not a very long duration. And it's not a very repetitive motion like something like cycling, biking, arm biking, jump rope, hiking, walking, like that stuff would be. Um, so so the the recommendation for moderate intensity aerobic exercise is 30 minutes, 5 days a week. So, what that looks like is if you consider something called RPE or rate of perceived exertion, moderate intensity would be like a 5 to maybe on the high end an 8 out of 10. And so that's like if comparing that to like resting and laying down on the couch doing absolutely nothing versus uh, you're outside and a bear's chasing you and you're running, and you feel like if you take another step, uh, your heart will die and you'll just be done. That would be like a 10, and laying on the couch would be like a 1. So um, another way that you can test that is the talk test. So what the talk test is let's say I'm running along and I'm running with a buddy or something like that, and me and the buddy are holding conversation. So if we're holding conversation, then that's passing the talk test. So that's what that's saying is even though, yeah, we're exercising, we're probably not exercising at such a high intensity that you would consider it vigorous, which I'll get to in a minute. Um, and of course, the classic way to determine this is you'll probably have a light sweat going. So that's another way that you can determine whether or not the uh, exercise that you're doing is considered moderate. For vigorous intensity aerobic exercise, in terms of that rate of perceived exertion, which is how difficult you feel the exercise is for yourself, regardless of what it actually is, um, that would be more so in the range of 8 to 10. Again, 10 being that sprinting from a bear, and if you take another step, you're toast, you're done, you're finished. And a 1 would be like laying on the couch. So that would be more of in the range of 8 to 10. You'll definitely be sweating if you're doing vigorous exercise or vigorous aerobic exercise. And as far as that talk test goes that we mentioned, you might be able to get a few words out, but you're not going to be able to string together a whole sentence. Um, and you might be able to verbally respond and verbally communicate in a few quick answers, but excuse me, but it won't really be um, like you can conversate. Um, it also wouldn't be like you can string together a full sentence and not have to break up that sentence with a big deep breath in between. Um, After that, what is the strength training and resistance training um, physical activity guidelines? So those are, I think I said it earlier in the video, performing resistance training for a total body resistance training exercise session for 8 to 10 com- comprising of 8 to 10 exercises for one set for 8 to 12 repetitions for each of those exercises. So um, an example of what a total body resistance training session would look like uh, that you could do just in your house that would meet those guidelines for you would be something like push-ups, overhead press, and a horizontal row, which is a pull like this, so a horizontal pulling exercise, a side lunge, some squats, calf raises, back extensions, and crunches. So I'm gonna show how you could do that with something a lot of people probably have something that's at least similar to in their home. Um, excuse me. So I have a 10-pound bag of rice that I got from Giant Eagle the other day. Right now it's probably more like 8.5 pounds because I did some cooking last night. But with this, we can do some of those exercises that we talked about. So we'll use that, but first we'll do a set of 8 to 12 push-ups. And again, the key with this guideline is that whatever weight you end up using for the one set of 8 to 12 for the exercise, that weight brings you close to failure, which to me represents I think I can do one more or maybe two more repetitions. So that's kind of the scale that you want to judge this on. And so for me, like I said, um, doing these wouldn't necessarily be what I would consider like exercise for myself. For push-ups, I would have to increase the number of reps, for example. For squatting, I would have to increase the weight, for example. So all of those can be varied, but this is just an example I'm providing to hit the guideline and make sure you're getting some strength training in twice a week. So 8 to 12 push-ups. I'm just going to do 8 of them, and then a overhead press with our bag of rice. So you can hold it just like a kettlebell, holding the bag of rice on the outside of your arm a little bit and press up overhead. So we did 8, then I did the other side. And then, yeah, we could use it for squatting. So I'll hold it in front, like I'm holding a kettlebell in front, hold it close to your chest, and we'll squat down for 8 reps. And then some side lunges. Again, I'm gonna hold it like this. For all of these, you can modify them. So like side lunges take a lot of balance. So you might want to hold on to something in front of you that you can stabilize yourself with, for example, depending on how comfortable you feel. So 1, 2. And then calf raises. These are just coming up on your toes, both feet at the same time. And then I forgot to do the row, but we'll do that one. So for this one, you want to keep a flat back. Don't let your back make like a rainbow. Keep a flat back like a tabletop. Eyes up, shoulder blades back, drive your elbow back. And then for the back extensions, for me, I like doing back extensions with some weight on my back. So I'm just going to hold the bag of rice like behind my head, and then we'll do our back extensions from there. So for these, we'll just bend over, bending the knees slightly, bending at your hips. So pulling your hips back and keeping your back nice and flat. And then the last one that we'll do for an example is crunches. Okay, and that was 8. So we did 8 of each of those one time, and that would be if you feel like you were going to failure at that, that would be meeting those guidelines. So some examples of how instead of exercise, you could meet these guidelines with physical activity. Some examples of stuff like that would be like grocery shopping, walking with a purpose, or doing stuff like gardening. It's mowing season, so you could go out and start doing that, or other landscaping activities. And all of these could be done in like bouts of 10 minutes at a time, or 5 minutes at a time, even if you feel like you're being challenged enough. Let me catch my breath for a second. Sorry, got a bit of a allergy season thing going on, so gotta catch my breath a second. And the last guideline that we're going to talk about is the flexibility training guideline. So for this one, the common misconception is that you should stretch every day. And when I say stretch every day, I mean doing stuff like static stretches where you're not moving, you're just holding that stretch position for X period of time. So an example of that would be like touching your toes for a hamstring stretch and holding that for 30 seconds or for a minute. It's the common misconception is that it's not actually, or the common misconception is that you should do that every day. And what these guidelines say are you should stretch each joint on both sides for for a total of 1 minute, one time through, 2 to 3 days a week. So what that would look like is like doing a bicep stretch where you're holding this position. So your bicep flexes your elbow. So we'll stretch by extending our elbow. Or if you're super flexible, which I'm not, you could do the same stretch but behind your back. Or I guess you could post your hand on something and do that. And then a tricep stretch. So pulling back, reaching your hand down your back and pulling back on the tricep. And then we'll do a shoulder stretch, which you could stretch the back of your shoulder by pulling in here or by propping your arm up on something and sitting back down into it so that you get an overhead stretch, and you'll feel this up in here through the back of your shoulder. And then you could do a similar stretch to that bicep one for the front of the shoulder where you're taking your arm back like that. And then you would go through the rest of your body and do that for 1 minute total. So we did the toe touch one. So going down as low as you can go for a minute, and then doing something like a quad stretch, which the quads are the front of your legs. So stretching that and doing the other side, and then a hip stretch for the front and back, which for the front could be similar to the quad stretch, but a hip stretch for the back would be something like this, hugging your knee to your chest. You could do it laying down as well to make it a bit easier. And then a calf stretch, which would be something like, I don't know if you can see it here, like sticking your foot up into the corner of the floor in the wall or something, and basically making a triangle, so the slanted part of the triangle with your foot and leaning forward. You'll feel that big stretch in the back of your calves. And then the way you would do that, which I'm not going to do because my ankles are a little wonky. Well, I'll do the right side, is putting your toes down. So like if you're wearing shoes, go laces down. If any of you have ever wrestled, you probably know what I mean by that. So go laces down and sit back as far as you can go, and you'll feel that stretch on the front of your ankle. And that would be considered like a total body flexibility session that you could do, doing it on both sides of the body for 2 sets of 30 seconds each, totaling to a minute, 2 to 3 days a week. So that's how you could meet that guideline as well. And like I said earlier in the beginning of the video, this stuff is mainly for just making sure that people are active and people are moving. It's not necessarily a weight loss tool or a strength training tool, but it could be used as stuff like that, depending on where the individual starts at. So if you folks have any questions, feel free to reach out and we can talk about it more. Thanks.